welcome to another episode of As God See Them Pod. I'm your host, Brienne Vay, and this is the podcast we talk about life from God view. Now, today's view is about suffering brings deliverance. Suffering brings deliverance. Now, actually, I have a story for you. I've mentioned a little bit about this. I've talked a little bit about this in my very first episode. When I gave y'all a little bit about me, about my life, when I talked about a little bit about my life before Christ. And I mentioned that I have been in an abusive relationship, which is very true. And I always, want to say that I won't ever talk about something I haven't been through. I'm not just trying to, give a word because it sounds good and, it's trendy. I literally am speaking my journey. So this message is like specifically wrapped around, today's message is pretty much a testimony, right? But I have a point, right? So I want to start like pretty much how a little bit in the beginning, right? So as I also mentioned, I have two daughters, I have two children, and the abusive relationship that I was in, or the guy that I was in an abusive relationship with, he is their father. And at the time, I know I always hear the saying of like, you see red flags about people, but you decide to kind of like ignore those things. And before I was saved, it was like, no, I did not see that coming. But after, now in this life of like, I evaluate my life, and like with me just having such a different perspective on relationships, right? I absolutely did see red flags of him, but I didn't want to. I was in a very desperate situation. I actually felt too. And I'll get to that. Okay. So when I met my kid's dad, we worked together. We worked in the same building, but we did not work for the same company. But we were in the same exact building. And so, I was at a very difficult time in my life with my family, where I was like living with my guardian at the time, someone who had adopted me, and it was very rocky. Like I wasn't connected with anyone in my home, seriously, except my sister of that adopted family. That's who I was connected with. But at the time, it was like I just was going through. I was going through just such a rough, like emotional, mental, like time with just my guardian, right? Because that's I had a good relationship with my sister in the home, but it was like I still suffered this relationship with someone who was raising me. So it was no connection. It was cold. I felt like I was more of a stranger in the home versus like actually a child of hers, and it was cold, right? Like, and that's something I can get. I'll eventually like tell y'all the depth of like all about, that those experiences of that. But I going back to the story, right? So I was just in a very I feel like I was really desperately seeking love, right? Because I did not feel it at the home I was at. I didn't feel it at all. So I feel like I was desperately seeking love. And he showed me what I thought was love, right? He showed me effort. He showed me like basically companionship, understanding, and at least that's what it was to me. That's what it came. It was somebody who was listening to me. It was somebody that I was spending time with too. It was like a bunch of saying a bunch of things that I kind of needed to hear in that moment. And so it was also, I I made a choice based off of my emotions, right? I had no wisdom, right? I had absolutely no wisdom. I was living in a world, I was living very vainly, right? Like I mentioned before in the episode, like I was definitely living vainful. And so um about a month and some is when we actually decided to, I guess, get into a relationship. Now this is crazy because it's like, now that I think back on it, it's like, why did I even do that? What really went on in my mind that I thought that this was okay? So after a month of, just really just like connecting, to me at the time, that's what it was. I moved in with this boy, and it was specifically, like I said, it was my emotions. I was going through like, it was just like, I just wanted to feel connected to somebody, and loved, right? And so I ended up moving in with him, and it was, now that I look back on it, it was manipulation. So I just want to fast forward, right? So after I did that, I vouch this so much. Do not move in with anybody, like especially before marriage. Right now that I'm living a different life, right? It's like, that's one of the, I think that's some of the best advice I can give to a youth, right? A younger person. Don't move in with a boy. Don't move in with a girl until you're married, literally. It seems like, that at the time for me, it felt like a great option, because it was like, this may, it was just what I was moving on emotion, right? And so it just felt like, okay, I can get away from what I was dealing with at home. So I did that, and it was completely stupid, right? So after I did that, life spiraled quickly. I mean, don't get me wrong, it felt good for a minute, because it's like, okay, I'm not, one, it wasn't the problem. I didn't have trouble necessarily following rules or whatever, or doing chores. It was more like, okay, I'm with somebody that I feel like, who wants me to be with them, right? That's what I felt. And I literally will still operate on emotion. And now, like I said, now that I look at it from the perspective of my growth, now it's like, oh my goodness, I was literally stupid. I was doing some stupid stuff. And it's like, all the flags definitely were there. I just was too wrapped up in my emotions, where I just did not want to, I didn't want to feel what I felt at home again. And I didn't want to feel like, I didn't want to be alone. And it was really just really my emotions, just really just no type of wisdom, right? No type of wisdom. And I, saw all the flags, just manipulation. The fact that when I moved in, I saw how controlling he was. But what I thought it was, he just wants to lead me. He wants to be a man. He, like that, like I really was very just, goodness gracious. I was stupid. Okay. And so anyway, yeah, like I saw so many things, and it was, I saw so much. Even though I was immature too, I saw him in a whole different way, of being mature. Like the way he handled certain things. I'm not going to get too much into that, but like it turned to it being very just mentally, emotional, and physical, right? Abuse, where it was just like, oh no, I can't. This is this is not something I should have done. Like I was like, this is like, what did I do? And those thoughts came after I became pregnant, right? Those thoughts came after that. I started to, and I think any mother can vouch that once you are about to have a child, from the process of being like, from the beginning of a process of knowing that you're pregnant, then going through the pregnancy, then actually birthing the child, your mind also goes through that, like goes through that growing process as you are also growing another like human, right? Like as you are going through the process, the pregnancy process, your brain is also going through a different process as well. It's like it's growing is into a whole different direction, and you start to see things so differently, and that's exactly what started to happen. So we're going to fast forward, right? So he became just like in my eyes like a demon. Like I the anger that he showed, I never had seen until or, and it wasn't that I never seen it. I never really saw it the way that I did until I was with child. Like I started to see things like as they really were. And it's really when I feel like true wisdom started to kick in. And so, I was in that relationship for a very long time. I was drained. I went from like, and I always used to, before I even entered a relationship, I had dated guys, but I never had a true like relationship where I'm like living with you and we are like, and then better yet, this is my first. Now we have our first child together. So it was just like, okay, this was like very, very new for me. So like I have been in this relationship for a very long time, and I was sinking so low. The longer I was in this relationship, I mean, he completely isolated me from family and pretty much where I was like only around his family. And if you know that if you've been in an abusive relationship, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so yeah, I was pretty much isolated from my family. And I mean, it was times where like man, that is something I'm not going to get too much into, right? I want to talk about the part where I finally got away from this relationship and how that was suffering, but I had went through another part of suffering that led to me being delivered and actually led to me being saved. So I had, been in a relationship for a while. I actually left the relationship at around, what is it? Was around like 6. No, actually, hold up. No, so actually around like 4 or 5 months, I actually being pregnant, I actually ended up getting my own apartment. And I left, right? And that was because of that. I wish I would have stayed gone, but I ended up going back because something happened that not led me back, but like something happened in my life where I felt like I needed to go back, right? I needed his support. That's what I just, naive, like, silly, just at the time, just silly. I knew at this time, I really knew who he was, but I didn't really have family to go to. Like I couldn't necessarily go back to my family. It was not an option. For real. So, second time around after I left and I came back, we had like things were worse than they already were. And I thought they would get better, but they were worse. They got worse. And so it got to a point like after, after me coming back, I had, life was so bad for me. I was literally lost, and I will never forget where it got so bad where I was literally washing dishes. I'm in there. I'm in it, I'm washing dishes and I'm talking to God. I'm praying basically. And at the time I didn't have a relationship with God. I just knew prayer and I knew of God. I did not have any type of relationship. And I remember washing dishes and I said, God, please get me out of this. Like I started to cry and I was like, God, get me out of this in the best way you know how. I will never forget it. And I was like, God, I cried. I just kept crying. I was like, just get me out of this. Get me out of this. The same day I said that prayer, was the same day I left that relationship. And let me just say this. What I thought was, I honestly, I didn't have too many thoughts, but like, thank you, God, for getting me out of this. I felt free. That's all I can tell. I felt absolutely free. The way I had to get out of that relationship was not was not something. This was not the way I wanted to, but I remember that I kept asking God. And when I sat down and thought about it, I'm like, oh my goodness. That's the moment I really acknowledged that God was real, but I still wasn't ready, right? I still wasn't ready for like, okay, to dive into who he was. And so after I left that relationship, I suffered. Like I suffered. I lost absolutely everything. Like I had nothing. I stayed with my biological mom at the time, but it wasn't a space for me and my kid. Like I had a kid, right? And also I found out that I was pregnant with my second child during this too. So it wasn't no place for me and my kid to stay. To me, it wasn't an environment that I wanted to raise my kid in. Also, it was like I kept, thinking like now I have a second kid on the way. So I was just like, something got to give. So when I left, I mean, completely lost everything. My kid's dad, he worked while I stayed at home. Like he was the bread. Like he knew how to control somebody. But yeah, I didn't have anything. I literally everything. I just left. Took me and my kid, and I left. I even like left clothes. I went back eventually to get my clothes little by little. My brother ended up helping me like go back and get my stuff little by little, like my clothes and stuff little by little. But I left everything. I was like out of there. Like and I suffered. I suffered very badly. I actually, after staying with my mom for probably like I want to say 2 months probably. I end up living, because I couldn't take the environment anymore. I actually end up living hotel to hotel. No, I actually end up. That's a testimony that I literally just remembered. But I ended up living with a friend that I knew for so long. She actually used to be a manager when I worked at Route 21, which was my first job. Okay, I love that job. Route 21 was my first job ever. I was real close with the manager at Route 21, and we always kept in contact. We actually always went out together, like all the time. We did so many things together, and so she always invited me places, like all the time. Every time she did something, she invited me. And we were talking one day, and I told her I was just talking and venting to her about my situation, and she was like, you can. She had a really big. She had a nice house. I think she had like 4 or 5 bedrooms, and she was like, you always can come stay with me. You can always come here. And at first I didn't really want to do that. I have very PTSD. Yeah, there we go. PTSD from staying with people. Like staying with a stranger really was just not an option for me, right? And not only that, I just had got out of the situation with my kid's dad, and like realizing that I made such a stupid choice of staying with him. It was like I really was just not. I was just good, right? But I end up one day, something happened with my mom, and I end up was like, you know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this for my kid, because I don't want my kid to be in this environment. So I'm gonna do this for my kid. We had our own space there. It was a very nice neighborhood. I end up doing that. And this is a testimony that I wasn't even going to tell, but I will never forget why I left. I still to this day don't know the true story of that, but she had basically one day I was laying in bed and a brick comes through the window. It literally, this is the second time that I literally experienced God's grace, God's protection and mercy, because this brick was so close to hitting my kid where she was either going to be in the hospital or dead. It grazed her arm where it was just a scrape, and it didn't touch me at all. Like the brick didn't touch me at all. We were laying together, and the bed literally was by the window. The brick lands directly on the bed. So and we were like this. It was nothing but God, right? And it was like, oh my goodness, it scared me so much, because it was like, I don't know really what I was thinking at the time. It was like, I got to get out of here. I don't know what else can happen. I still to this day don't know why she got a brick thrown through her window. I know, like, I got out of there so fast, and I cut off all contact with her. It scared me so much, and I had no idea, like, and I didn't like the way that she reacted to it. It was, it's something kind of like you just had to be there to see what happened. But it was just like, you know what, And at this point, I am like I have imagine being pregnant and like with these emotions. And at this time, I'm 7 months pregnant, right? With a 1 year old. And I'm just like, So I end up going to say hotel to hotel, right? I'm trying to find a place to live, but it's hard because at the time it was COVID. I couldn't get a job, right? I was like having no luck with a job. So the thing was, before COVID hit, before they started closing down everything, I actually was working at Clink. What is that? So I was working at Clinique in Macy's, right? The Clinique counties in Macy's. That's where I was working. And then when COVID hit and they started shutting down Macy's, a bunch of stuff, and we got furloughed. So that's why I wasn't working. And so I couldn't find a job after that. And, but Macy's paid you for it. Right. And so, I had income coming in. Right. And so anyway, I just did not have it wasn't like forever, right? So I had no proof of like income, especially income for me to get into a decent place. And so I ended up just going hotel to hotel, like for a while. And this is where all that suffering, I remember like crying. I was going hotel to hotel, and I remember the night the night that the brick came through the window, I literally left that house that night. That's how I was terrified and scared. And I ended up going to a hotel. But the hotel, when I got there, it was more like a motel vibe. And I know this may sound like bougie right now, but I was like, okay, no, me and my kid are not sleeping here. It just was like, I'm not laying my kid in this bed. It was just not it. And I just booked it because I was so in a rush. So we ended up sleeping in the car for the overnight, and then we ended up getting a different hotel. And I was living like that for a while, and I was crying almost every day, every single day. And I was pregnant, and I was like, how is I didn't even really ask why is God allowing this. I was just like, how, I thought this was what I needed to do. I thought that leaving that relationship would help me out. And now that I'm looking at it, right, this is why I'm speaking on it right now. That was God bringing me to the other side. That was God bringing me to Him. It was Him. It was that suffering was, I'm sorry, y'all. That suffering was leading to my deliverance. All of that was leading to my deliverance. And it's like with the brick coming through the window, God was really that was God trying to get my attention. And I was like, the fact that it didn't touch, it didn't touch us. It scraped my child's arm, but it did not do any harm to us. It did not damage us. And if you would have saw the position that we were in, literally where this brick could have took my child out, could have killed my baby. if you have ever had like your bed by a window, like that's where we are. My bed was literally in front of the window where the brick came through. It could have done anything to either one of us, and it didn't. And so, you know, after all that, going from hotel to hotel, and I'm thinking that leaving that relationship, because I had stability in the relationship. I had like, okay, that's what was the hardest part of leaving. I was like, okay, well, I just want to be stable. I don't want to put my child through homelessness, or I don't want to not be able, I don't want to be unstable. And so going from hotel to hotel, and I was getting closer to, delivery, where it was time for me to have my kid. And I was just really stressed, and I was crying every day. And I'm like, how is this going to work? This also, then God shows me how he makes a way out of no way. I was completely stressed out. So I actually end up calling on someone for help. And I remember when I had to go to a hospital. I remember I had to go to the hospital for something my kid's dad had did to me. And the lady had, I guess she was a counselor or whatever, a therapist. So she gave me her card, and she was like, if you ever, if you really need help and you really want to get out this, situation, this is my card, contact me. And I remember contacting her, and, I was telling her my situation. Like, I've been out of this relationship for so and so. I'm having trouble with this. I'm struggling. And she gave me a bunch of resources. So I reached out to these resources, and I actually end up being taken into a shelter. Now, at the time, I had no idea what to expect by going into a shelter, and it truly was not. It was like God given. It was not. I had my own space. I had like literally my own space. It was not what I thought a shelter was, right? I thought it was like I was scared, and I accepted with the fact, which is like, okay, this is what I got to do for right now. So me and my kid can stop staying hotel and hotel. It was something that I feel like I needed to do, right? And so, here's how I knew like this was God again, is it was I got the last spot in the shelter, because it really wasn't a shelter. It was a house. At least that's what it looked like. It was a house that had a bunch of rooms, and in each room you had your own bathroom. And it was beautiful. And they gave you they gave you a welcome kit. They gave you so many things, right? Here's another thing. The day that I got there, my water broke. The day that I got to the shelter, my water broke. 2 days ago, I had just been crying. Like, where am I going to go? And I am about to have a baby. Like, I did not know where we were going to live. And just so happened, it was perfect timing for everything. And my gosh, it was perfect timing for everything. I called this place. I did. They also, in order for me to be accepted into the place, you had to pretty much cut off. You could not have any communication with whoever you were in a domestic violence relationship with. You could not have any communication with them. Also, you could not have your phone. So that really put me in extreme focus. But this place was not like it was literally like a home. It literally was like a home. I mean, my kids had a playroom. They had we had like this nice deck where we can go outside and just let our children play and like chill in a deck. I mean, it was like a home. It was like a big house with a bunch of girls in there. Like, it was literally like a home. And, oh my goodness, it's just like, I could not believe, like, I was literally sitting here thinking like I knew nothing of God, I knew of God, but didn't know him. And I at the time, right, I'm thinking like, how, like, this is why is my head can wrap around what was happening, basically, because it was like everything was perfectly timed. I once I reached out to that lady, she gave me those resources. I made those calls. I literally, the place that I got, that I end up going to, just end up being the place that stood out to me in those lists of resources that she gave me. I end up calling the place that stood out to me. And she also gave me like gave me brief descriptions of the shelters. And so they told me what to do. I had to get a COVID test, and pretty much I was they only had one spot available, one more spot, and I so happened to get that spot, which was just mind blowing. Then the day that I get to this place, literally was the day that my water broke. I just could not. And here's another thing. My water didn't break. It started to leak. So I end up having to go to the hospital, and I end up staying in the hospital I needed to go. Just imagine if I did not go to this place where just imagine if I would have been just going hotel to hotel. Like, it was just, my goodness. But it's just like, now I'm going to get into like how all of that suffering that I had went through literally all of it was to bring me to God. It was literally for my saving. Like, suffering is not something that God wants to do. It is something that God has to do. Suffering is not something that God wants to happen. It is something that God has to allow. It brought me to Him. That suffering literally brought me to Him. It literally brought me to God. All different opportunities start to open up for me. I am now sitting right here with my goodness, with such a different perspective of life. The way I look today, I didn't even look like this a month ago. But just imagine the way I look today, compare it to how I looked in 2019 when I was pregnant with an abusive relationship, no direction, just completely lost. And now, man, it's like I'm overflowed with such a joy now and such a freedom. And it has led me to this message today of how our suffering really leads us to deliverance, right? How suffering literally leads us to deliverance. Now, I want to go to my foundation, and in Romans 5, verse 14, it says, "Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, who is a pattern of the one to come." I'm not going to get too in depth with that, but that is my foundation, right? I got a lot of revelation from that. That scripture pretty much gives us a brief description of how suffering leads to deliverance. When Adam and Eve sinned, right? Their punishment for sin was suffering, right? The suffering that inherited to the world, which was sin inherited into the world from Adam and Eve because of their sin. Their disobedience and what they did led us into being separated from God, right? Because it now is in the world. right? What God allowed, right? What God allowed from the time that Adam and Eve sinned, from the time Jesus walked this ground. Suffering all leads back to deliverance. Del- suffering is God's pattern. It's evidence of his work. From the time that committed this sin, from Adam and Eve committed this sin, it led us to suffering. It led us to death. It led us to sin. We had no savior before Jesus Christ. We can point blank period, right? We were literally suffering. The world, we were suffering. We were pretty much perishing, even with Abraham, Noah, Moses, even with, like, we, we were still suffering in sin. So that right there just shows us that God has a pattern with suffering, and of course a purpose with it. If you are in a situation where you are suffering, just know that that is a pattern from God. Not saying that we cannot cause our own suffering, not saying that we cannot put ourselves in situations, but when God allows suffering in your life, just know he will rescue. From the moment that he allowed us to, when he allowed the world to suffer from sin, he had a plan to deliver us from it as well. And I've never had such a big revelation. It's like, and that is because I had to experience suffering. Some things you really don't understand that God needs you to experience. He needs you to really go through some things to know him. It is literally, suffering is not something that God wants to use. It's something that he has to. He does not want you to suffer. He doesn't want you going through the things that you went, the hard things. That's not the life he intended for us to have. If you go back to Genesis, God literally creates a life for us that is so abundant. Adam and Eve were wealthy. They had everything that they needed. They made a choice to disobey him, and it led to suffering. Even the suffering we even lead ourselves into. Because God could have simply, at the time, right? He could have simply just if we look at it in our simple minds, if we look at it like, why couldn't God just do it this way? Why couldn't he just did it this way? We will never be able to grasp what God's logic, right? We won't. It just won't happen. It just won't happen. That's why he requires faith and not sight. I've learned that in my 3 years of being saved. Like, I won't ever understand everything, but I'm telling you right now, as I grow in this relationship with him, what I do understand is that he is perfect. He is good. He is loving. And he is literally all of all. It's nothing that it's nothing that he allows to happen that he does not have a plan for. The Bible shows us that. Like, Yeah, the other day I was thinking, and I was just like, what it seems to me like is that the Old Testament shows us who God is, but the New Testament shows us what God does. And it it this is just the revelation and the things that God's been downloading in this season, especially in this season of just stillness, in this season of just like a whole bunch of honestly low key suffering, right? It's just like, I and it's, this was what this just shows me, like, goodness, God is like, he knows what he is doing. God literally knows what he's doing. And is what's great about it all is that what God is doing does not require you to really hold the weight of the world. It requires you to just trust in him and know that he literally has the plan of it all. Him sending his son here to deliver us from sin and death lets me know that every situation that I have, he can be trusted with. Every problem that I have, he can deliver me from it. Everything in my life, he can take care of it. This is by far the biggest and best revelation I've had ever. And it's beautiful, right? It's beautiful. It's really all I got in it for today. Yeah. And yeah, that's it. That's all, I think. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm gonna leave it here. I'm gonna leave it right here for right now. I'm trying to come up with, like call to action things, like some things that I can kind of do to interact with viewers, if that makes sense. But I'm just, I'm learning this as I do it, to be honest. And so I am, yeah, this is it for today. Thank you for tuning in. Remember, it is not what the world sees, it is what God sees. And if no one told you they love you, I do.